Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pegashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from many blogs, many websites, many podcasts. He is Useful Human Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing tonight?
Awful, terrible, miserable. I think you know why.
So we just watched the Eagles game. We just watched the Eagles defeat the Panthers. And my question to you is, what did Carson Wentz do wrong in this game? Because I'm fairly certain that you are the only person paying attention to anything Carson Wentz did wrong.
Well, actually, one of the biggest plays of the game that Carson Wentz messed up was missing an open Aguilar late in the game that would have sealed it. Obviously, it didn't end up mattering because the Panthers couldn't finish on the 2-minute drive when they got the ball back at 2:03. That's something that he did wrong. And then the first two drives, he's throwing the ball a little bit too high for his receivers. One of those probably should have been a pick. So let's not say he was perfect. A lot of people are jumping on a game where he had one absolutely amazing drive. I'll give him that. He had an absolutely amazing drive. Two drives where he's getting credit for touchdowns, both of them under 20 yards, one 12-yard drive, another 17-yard drive. His statistical output is a lot better than I think his actual in-game play. Some beautiful passes on that drive. One or two beautiful passes outside of that drive. A deep ball taken away by a pretty bad pass interference call. I'll agree with a bunch of the Eagles fans that say that the refs were a little bit one-sided, it seemed like, in that game. There was one call that I thought Cam should have had that he didn't get, but whatever. The Eagles obviously played better than their opponents. That includes Carson Wentz outplaying Cam Newton. But I don't think that means Carson Wentz has demonstrated that he is a good quarterback yet. And I think that can be an objective assessment, even though I'm clearly also searching for reasons that would be the case. I think if you break down the fact that he really only had, 1.5 good drives, that's not like really something to celebrate. I mean, you take a look at his statistical success throughout the year. I mean, Case Keenum's, top 5 in adjusted net yards per attempt. Is he just as good? It's kind of weird. I'm just putting it out there.
All those flavors, and you choose to be salty.
Hey, man, he leads the NFL over the past 2 years in total fumbles. That's pretty bad. Don't want to give the ball away, man. You
don't. Did he fumble this game?
He did. The Eagles did end up recovering it.
Oh.
But yeah, and in fact, it was kind of immaterial because the Eagles didn't. The Panthers ended up recovering it. It was immaterial because the Panthers ended up punting it. It was like a 3-and-out. So it kind of didn't matter. The first 2 sacks on Wentz didn't really matter because the fumble ended up turning into a punt for the Panthers, and the other sack was on 2nd down. The Eagles converted 3rd down because Carson Wentz has suddenly become good at 3rd and long when he was so bad at 3rd and long earlier in his career. I don't know. I'm waiting for him to regress. I think there are signs there for him to regress. But the Eagles have a really good team. They've just a really good team.
And does it really count as out-dueling Cam Newton if Cam Newton hurt his shoulder on that one play?
Well, I think that he clearly out-dueled Cam Newton in this game. I think that doesn't mean he's a better quarterback than Cam Newton. I think part of the reason that's true is Cam Newton clearly hurt his shoulder in the game.
All these flavors. When I was watching the game and they showed the graphic that said that both teams were 4-1, I was almost surprised. I thought I'd been paying attention to the league, but the way everyone's been complaining about the Panthers and how Cam Newton has played so far this year, I apparently missed the memo that said they were still like 4-1. Like, you wouldn't know it from all the coverage,
right?
Even ignoring the coverage of Cam Newton's kind of sexist dismissal of a reporter.
Right. Well, I think just the Panthers in general, the coverage about the team overall tends to be very Cam Newton centric. Even in previous years when that defense was a lot better. I think even just 2 years ago, that defense, Kirk Coleman is like leading safeties in interceptions. Rip, former Viking Kirk Coleman. And Josh Norman's still there, and they're just kind of figuring out those other cornerback positions. They're still getting pressure with Charles Johnson. And that interior with Kawan Short and not Dewan Edwards, but the other defensive tackle, Starlo Tulele, like they were doing a really good job on defense, and that defense deserved to get a lot of press, but they didn't get much besides lip service, and Newton's kind of the talk of the town, and Newton has always been the focus for the Panthers in terms of the way that you cover him. So when he does play poorly but they win, the discussion is still about, Cam Newton. Those first two games were just atrocious. And then, the third game is, fine, whatever. And the next two games are great. And then this game, he was just awful again. And so that's kind of how we think the Panthers are doing, because that's how people talk about the Panthers. And they're 4-1.
It'd be like one of those situations where where everyone's complaining that Tom Brady isn't doing enough for his team, and seems to be taking off plays, and just like for entire quarters he looks terrible and the offensive line looks terrible, and you look up and they're 4-1. Like, really? That's that happened? Doesn't make sense. Oh well, there's probably nothing to read into that at all. So welcome to this show, which is a fine show. We have a great little interview for you about the Packers game. We have plenty of things to go over, but before we start, we would just like to thank you for listening and thank you for contributing in the past. We appreciate any sort of donation that you're willing to give us, because we are ad-free. This is the only ad you ever hear during the show. Just a little thing saying, hey, thank you guys for listening. If you like what you hear and you hear value in it, please go to patreon.com/Norse Code, and you can donate there. That's the sustaining donations for like a monthly donation. If you want to do $1, $3.50, $3.50 to keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, $10 a month, do whatever you want to do. But that's if you appreciate the show and want to help us along. All money that is coming in right now is going toward the London Fund, so we really do appreciate anything that comes in. Also, paypal.me/Norse Code. That also goes to us, and that is also going to the London stuff. We are really ramping up right now and making some solid plans. We've been receiving emails from our listeners in the UK with ideas, with meetups. So we're pretty excited about this. Dusty and Arif are going, and God bless them, we're gonna try to do a podcast out there. Well,
Comcast, it's doing its best to hold Dusty back from Norse Code, and we say we're sticking it to you, Comcast. We're still recording Norse Code. Take that.
We're bringing the field recorder out into public, and we're bringing Eric Thompson in too. Damn it, this is happening. So, just a quick note: we did get a really nice donation here from Mark Ward through PayPal. Again, thank you, Mark, for helping executive produce this week's show. Arif, do you have a time for just a couple questions from Mark? Since Dalvin Cook is out for the season, what else should I look forward to, such as perhaps a Teddy sighting?
Yeah, well, I think so. It kind of depends on like what you kind of draw value from. Like sometimes it's kind of interesting to see, how these debates break down. And I think going forward, we're going to have some debates. How good is Jerick McKinnon? Because I don't think he's going to keep putting up those big yardage games like he did last week. Should the Vikings invest long term in Sam Bradford or Teddy Bridgewater? Both of them have pretty significant knee injuries. Those are interesting debates that can get tiresome if you follow them too closely, but are kind of interesting to just kind of watch from afar. That's something to look forward to. But if you just kind of want like stuff that is just unambiguously good, yeah, of course, the return from Teddy, that Teddy Bridgewater seems to be, authoring, is worth following. Besides that, I think that, Anthony Barr is putting together a pretty good redemption story off of his last season. He's playing really, really well, and he's potentially due for a contract extension. The Vikings activated their 5th-year option, but this is essentially a contract year, and the Vikings will probably want to lock him down long term and not have to spend the franchise tag amount of money that it would take to retain that 5th-year option on Anthony Barr. So that's I think worth watching. And then just in general, Case Keenum is playing really well. His statistics are overrepresenting his overall performance. I think that was particularly true in this last game. We talked about that in the prior episode of Norse Code. But you just see how long he gets going. I want to see, Stephon Diggs kind of establish himself as one of the best receivers in the league. They're all things to look forward to. And then at the end of the year, it's going to be fun to see maybe infuriating, but it's going to be fun to see, how many Pro Bowlers from this offense and from this defense will get recognized out of the ones that deserve to get recognized. I mean, there's so many people on defense you could say, deserve an All-Pro or Pro Bowl consideration. I think, Harrison Smith and Xavier Rhodes and Everson Griffin are all in serious consideration for All-Pro for their position, and certainly therefore like in consideration for Pro Bowl honors at their position. Anthony Barr's playing like a Pro Bowler. Eric Hendricks, I think that he's had 2 down games, 3 up games. He has a lot of potential to be in the conversation for Pro Bowl talk. And then Linval Joseph is the best, I think, nose tackle in the league. These are all like interesting storylines to follow. And then, you could put that Teddy Bridgewater return story just kind of right on top of it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
Do you think
Case
Keenum ends up starting in the Pro Bowl when Carson Wentz can't because he's going to the Super Bowl? Do you think that ends up happening? Maybe not starting, but ends up being like the number 2 quarterback?
Nothing would pain me more than that series of events. So yeah, that's of course going to happen.
Just wanted to mention that. Second question was, what are your favorite podcasts? We have gone over that in the past. Do you got a quick one you want to throw to Mark?
Political, Pod Save America. Non-political, maybe more Vikings related. Climbing the Pocket's really good. I was just on Purple Podcast with Matthew Collar. That's pretty good too. And then of course I recommend my other podcast, Andy Lukery Football Machine, and Wide Left Podcast, also a political podcast. And then non-political, non-football, 99% Invisible is really great.
Nice. For favorite podcasts, I'm also going to be throwing out The Bugle, which used to be the John Oliver podcast, which is still going on and still going on strong. Definitely has a UK feel since you are in the UK. Final question from him: is there any unheralded U.S. fast food that he should think about cooking up? Gorditas are actually really quick and easy to put together.
So there's variations on burgers that are pretty good, like the Juicy Lucy in Minnesota, the Butter Burger in Wisconsin. Both of those are really good. America's Test Kitchen has a good recipe for. So, I should keep on reminding myself to put stuff in the show notes. I keep on mentioning, hey, there's this recipe you should follow. I'll put it in the show notes. Then I never do. But yeah, I'll put that mac and cheese recipe I mentioned last week in the show notes. I'm also going to put this Butter Burger recipe that America's Test Kitchen put together in the show notes. It's really good. I think it's better than the Culver's Butter Burger. Maybe not better than some of the Butter Burgers I've had in Wisconsin, but I think it is really better than I think most of the Butter Burgers people are familiar with. So yeah. I'll throw those 2 out there.
Sweet. So again, thank you, Mark, for donating. Really do appreciate it. If you'd like to donate, you can go to norsecode.podcast.com. We also have a merchandise section there if you'd like to pick up one of the bumper stickers. So now that we have all that out of the way, Reef, why don't you talk about our guest, Alex?
Yeah, so I was on Alex Petakas's APC podcast. That's Acme Packing Company. That's the Packers SB Nation blog. And I had a great time talking to them. I invited Alex onto our show to talk about the Packers, and the same way that we talk to all of our guests. I want a roster breakdown. I want to know kind of what the update on the storylines are, and I want to know sort of what they think of the Vikings and how those things match up. Sometimes we get some pretty good moments, like when we asked Trevor Sikkema of the Buccaneers, how many yards does he think Mike Evans is getting against Xavier Rhodes, and it tells you sort of how our players are kind of viewed around the league and what people think of their players. And I think we had a pretty good discussion in this one too, including candid thoughts on, how good really is Aaron Jones, the running back that's been performing pretty well. And some like pretty candid thoughts about the Packers defense, which either has really good players or really bad players, depending on where you look.
And sadly, it no longer has our favorite player that kept getting arrested for marijuana and gun charges and everything. They finally let him go.
They finally let go the best nose tackle in Packers history.
And the sad thing is that might be accurate. We haven't done the legwork to really figure it out. It's like that Always Sunny in Philadelphia thing where Charlie's talking about the creation of smoke and stars, and Mac goes, "I don't think that's true, but I don't know enough about it to say outright that it's wrong." I can't disprove it. I can't disprove Charlie here. So go ahead and listen to our fantastic interview with Alex Petakas, and right after that, we're going to go right into the mailbag.
All right, Alex, thanks for joining us. We've got a ton of questions that we want to ask you about the Packers specifically, and some kind of the unusual quirks that's kind of evolved with the Packers over the course as the season has progressed. But I think the first question I want to ask is, what's with the Stephen A. Smith story about Aaron Rodgers wanting out?
Sure. I'm sure we're surprised to see, you being a guest on our podcast, the comment section just lighting up, and none of it having to do with you. I know he talked about that a little bit online, but so this story, it's something that I just kind of thought was going to blow up. So basically, I guess right before we went to record our podcast, Stephen A. Smith went on ESPN Madison, which is a station I used to work at in Wisconsin, and he basically said that a source told him, a source close to Aaron Rodgers had told him that after the conclusion of last season, Rodgers was frustrated and fed up with management's lack of ability to field a, competent defense. And which is I find the interesting part of that being that they have invested most of their draft capital on defense. And every time I think about if I'm Aaron Rodgers and I'm frustrated, it's because actually the pieces around him offensively, which I think are by no means terrible, but they don't invest a ton on that side of the ball. But anyway, so I think Stephen A. then made the leap and said, so I have to believe that is still the case. So I think making the connection that after you get your butt whooped in the NFC Championship game, you're obviously going to be disappointed, that you still feel that way when your team's 4-1. And honestly, your defense is probably a little bit better than it was a year ago. I just find that to be crazy. And it just seemed like it wasn't substantiated with any type of real journalistic evidence, but more of a, kind of Stephen A. I have to believe type thing. Which, Stephen A. is a character and he's great at what he does, but it just reeks of clickbaity type stuff.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, let's talk about the offense. It's kind of been the cornerstone of the Packers' identity. A lot of people talk about the offense kind of all the time because it has been so explosive in the past. It has the potential to always be explosive with a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. And he's been playing pretty well, capping it off with a pretty thunderous comeback victory. I kind of wanted to ask, just in general, relative to where you put Rodgers' level of play, just overall over the course of his career, how do you think that he's been playing this year thus far?
He's obviously having a great season, but I guess relative to the rest of his career, like you said, it's actually it's tricky because he's had, obviously, I think 2 seasons that are just clearly better than this one already. 2011, the MVP year when they went 15-1, from start to finish, he was just out of this world.
Yeah, one of the greatest quarterback seasons that I think we've ever seen.
Just efficiency wise, right? Just just out of this world, an offense that couldn't be stopped. And that year, I think, was one of their a year that their defense was just atrocious. So it goes to show how amazing that season was. 2010, he was good, but I wouldn't put that above the way he's playing right now. I would say the other MVP season, 2014, is probably there. But those two aside, I think he's probably playing some of his best football, and I kind of have to just trust what Mike McCarthy says. And he said the same thing, that Aaron's dealing with a lot as far as what they're throwing at him, and he's been handling it really, really well. And in particular too, from 2014 on, I think the Packers offensive line, it's not underrated anymore, but they were kind of underrated when they lost in the NFC Championship to the Seahawks. I never really thought their line was that big of an issue. But this year, with the injuries they've had and the way that they kind of haven't really missed a beat with, having to play what ended up being their 5th tackle, is really just a testament to him and the fact that no matter what their situation is up front, you can carve an offense around Aaron Rodgers. You can say, okay, well, this week we're gonna spread teams out and do quick intermediate passing game 5 wide, get the ball out nothing other than a 3-step drop, and he can do that obviously very, very well. And you can also rely on him in a lot of long developing plays, which they've done quite a bit. And even when the protection does break down, they still have success doing so. So, so that's a really long answer
that's great.
to your question. But I mean, like he's just shown no signs of slowing down as far as like, physically. I don't see any type of, difference between him in his late 20s to now, as far as like his ability to make things happen on his feet. And that's a great sign. And obviously I think he's probably still got the number one arm in the NFL.
So I saw this mentioned on Reddit. One of my co-hosts on another podcast mentioned this too, and I hadn't really thought about it until just now. You take a look at the 2004 quarterback class. You got Eli, Phillip, and Ben, and they all seem like they're on the verge of retirement. You take a look at the very next year, 2005, Aaron Rodgers, Alex Smith, and they don't seem like they're in the same class of veteran. And Alex Smith had been benched and started a bunch of different offensive coordinators, revival in his career late. Rodgers, of course, playing behind Favre. So I'm sure that plays a pretty big role. But does it feel weird that the amount of time that it feels like these players have left for the 04 class and the 05 class are just so distinct?
I hadn't really thought of it either. I think, like you and I talked about this on our show, like Ben Roethlisberger just like contemplating retirement at like almost every chance he gets to speak to the media and then backpedaling. Like, I mean, we're just waiting for Roethlisberger and Eli's careers to end. And I don't know if it's because Alex Smith hasn't always been a full-time starter. Obviously he was usurped by Colin Kaepernick for a little bit, and Aaron
David
Rodgers,
Carr
obviously.
And Troy Smith.
Yeah. And now he's like an MVP candidate, which I still can't wrap my head around. But, and then Rodgers sat for 3 years, if that makes them feel newer to us. Because, also, I guess, just as far as Rodgers goes, I think Packers fans are really confident he has another 5 or so really good seasons left in him, because he's very, very vocal, kind of like a less annoying Tom Brady, about his diet and like some of the things that he's done. Some of the things that he's done in order to, I guess, like elongate his prime. He's lactose intolerant, which he let everybody know, which he found out late, and he doesn't eat cheese anymore. And you imagine how that goes over in Wisconsin. And then he took up the yoga. I mean, it's like, a few things that he shared. And I don't mean to sound like I'm annoyed with it, because I love learning about Rodgers the person. He's an interesting guy. But every offseason he like adds something new to his arsenal, with as far as like physical health. So I think for him, that's probably the reason why he doesn't feel like an old creaky-kneed Ben Roethlisberger.
I was going to contest your characterization that he was less annoying than Tom Brady, but then you said with regards to diet, and I basically have to concede that point.
I mean, he's not. I don't see him writing a book anytime soon, or trying to sell you any type
AR-12
of water. Yeah, right.
All right. Well, so a lot of the discussion about how to slow down the Packers offense. This is kind of par for the course for any elite quarterback. You put pressure on them, whatever, right? But it feels kind of uniquely true with regards to this offensive line. Like you said, it had been underrated for quite a while, and now it feels like, maybe not breaking down is the right word, but it feels like a significantly less talented unit than we've seen in a long time. Going up against that Minnesota defensive line with Everson Griffin, Danielle Hunter, Linval Joseph, and I think a pretty good rotation of under tackles with Shamar Stephen, Tom Johnson, etc. How do you feel about that offensive line holding up against what I think is, maybe the second best or third best defensive line in the NFL behind the Seahawks?
Yeah, I don't feel great. I mean, they are getting healthier. Brian Bulaga obviously has been back, and David Bakhtiari, he did practice today as we tape this, so it's looking like there's a good chance he's going to make his return. But even healthy, or more healthy, I guess, healthy enough to play, I'm still a little bit worried. I mean, I feel like with Griffin, Hunter, even Brian Robinson, like the Vikings they do have the mold. And it's weird to say this, given Rodgers' like numbers against the Vikings in his career, but they do have the mold, I think, that you need to slow Rodgers down enough, in that you don't have to send any more than 4 to get after him. And again, like, he's had success against the Vikings, but like, if you're just going by the stats and not like watching some of the games, like, the Zimmer defenses usually can get away with playing like two-man against Rodgers because of the fact that they can bring four. And what ends up happening a lot is just a lot of stagnant offense, like Rodgers just sitting in the pocket, not really being able to escape it because of how athletic your ends are, but also nothing really developing downfield because you have a really talented secondary. So I don't anticipate the Packers lighting up the scoreboard. Like I feel okay going into the game, just given that like Rodgers eventually is going to make enough plays, and he's going to catch people with 12 guys on the field and have a free play or whatever. Like they're still very capable of one or two explosive plays, but I think like it's not going to look like Dallas. Like They move the ball with such ease against Dallas, and that's even with Dallas generating pressure on Aaron Rodgers. I think it's just an entirely different scenario against Minnesota to be given. And also, like, I really like your guys' linebackers. Like, Packers fans have been so jealous of the Minnesota linebacking core for a number of years, and like it feels like we're finally like able to say that we have like decent enough linebackers. But I also feel like that's pretty significant given the way the Packers have been working in the middle of the field recently, like getting creative with 5 receiver sets and the way they use Martellus Bennett, and Randall Cobb is kind of their guy that can create a mismatch when Ty Montgomery's out. And I feel like the interior of the second level of the Vikings defense is more than capable of thwarting that.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the case. I'm also quite happy with those linebackers. They'll also be up against Aaron Jones, a running back that the Vikings liked in the draft from UTEP. Because like the thing with the Packers has always been, well, once Aaron Rodgers gets like a real running back, it's going to be really devastating. Eddie Lacy shows up, has a good season and a half, and then whatever, and then Ty Montgomery shows up and has a good sort of 4 games, and it's like whatever. Now it's Aaron Jones. He's having some pretty good games. What's up?
Yeah, man, I think we have to just like get. I don't know how you feel, Arif. I'd be more interested in how you feel about it, especially given the running back history and the icon that had been there for so long in Adrian Peterson. But like the days of that, just like we have finally like the guy. I feel like at least in Green Bay and a lot of other places, the way offense is played in the NFL is over. Like you just kind of need enough guys who can do enough things. And I feel like they finally have that. Like I think Aaron Jones, if we're going like in the truest sense of what a running back is, I think Aaron Jones might be the closest thing they've had to that in, I don't know, a while, maybe since like Ryan Grant. But I also don't think that means like he just takes over right away. Like Ty Montgomery is, I think the great thing about Ty Montgomery, even though he's like practicing and he may play, is that he doesn't need to be a feature back to be valuable to the Packers. Like his value is in that he is also a more than capable receiver. And just like by alignment alone, he can bring more to your offense, given his skill set that I think, running backs the Packers have had in a really long time are. So Aaron Jones can do that too. He's a really talented pass catcher, but I don't think like, oh, we found the guy. Now we're going to run the ball. He's going to get 25 carries and all of a sudden like, he's the feature back in our offense. I don't really see that. And also in a Mike McCarthy offense, it's pretty rare, I think, that the Packers really like they like to run the ball. Like, I mean, we make fun of it because we're like, any play you take the ball out of Rodgers' hands, like, right. Why would you? But they run the ball to offset a rush. So we may see quite a bit of that against you guys, against Minnesota. But as good as Jones has been, I don't see him like being a guy that is now all of a sudden a feature back in the truest sense. Does that make sense?
No. That totally makes sense. It's
like
less important. You don't need to invest as much talent in it, but Aaron Jones can be the guy. Totally get it.
Yeah, like as a group, I think they're a well-rounded running back, and that excites me. But and fantasy-wise, like sure, Aaron Jones is probably worth a pickup. But most people already have picked him up. I'm just saying. I'm not like, oh my God, we found our savior, like the best thing since I'm on green. That's just not the way I think that position is used, really almost anywhere anymore.
Well, before we flip sides to the other side of the ball real quick, I just want to talk about the receiver-cornerback matchup. I'm obviously a big fan of Xavier Rhodes. I think he's one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. Jordy Nelson, I think at one point was one of the best receivers in the NFL. Right now he's kind of in top 15 territory in my head, which is not bad. But I think that gives Xavier Rhodes a bit of an advantage in a direct matchup. But I'm not as confident sort of on the other side. Davante Adams is someone who is playing a lot better than I'd expected after his second year. Trey Waynes is playing... I didn't like Trey Waynes coming out of the draft, so I don't want to say as expected, because he's playing a lot worse than I expected. But, to that level, he's playing like I feared. How about that? And that's, not a matchup I'm super excited about. Do you see Aaron Rodgers trying to go strength to strength, targeting Nelson more often, or do you think that an exploitable weakness is going to be a little bit more interesting? Because, I imagine Rhodes is going to shadow Nelson. Then exploitable weakness is going to be sort of more his style with Adams against Waynes.
I think exploitable weakness. I think the Packers have kind of a track record of that even. I know this was years ago now, but
comes up in my head.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I know it's years ago, but like when they actually just used Davante Adams as just a decoy for an entire game, just kind of hanging him out to dry against Richard Sherman and almost exclusively attacking the other side of the field. I think it is an exploitable weakness, but I will say I'd be interested to see if we're getting to the point now where Xavier Rhodes should be tasked with covering Adams instead. And Jordy Nelson's still really effective. I agree with you. I think you still have to have him in a conversation of, top 15, 20 receivers in the NFL. But from an overall skill set, I feel like Davante Adams now is bringing more to the table that he's healthy.
That's astounding
and I think that,
growth.
I feel like it's not that much of a hot take if you kind of just like Jordy Nelson has been an unbelievable red zone weapon. Jordy Nelson, and I think there is something to be said. I know this sounds really lame. Like there's no way you can measure this with any type of metric. But there's something to be said with how long he and Aaron Rodgers have played together, and how dependable I think Jordy Nelson is. Like when things break down, and when Rodgers is like having those games where he's just running for his life, like Jordy Nelson is always there for that toe tapping sideline catch. But just from a physical profile, like I think Adams is more of a threat, and he's so good off the line. Like I think it's almost inarguable to say that Jordy Nelson hasn't lost a bit of a step, and that's not to say he's not good anymore, but I feel like you can put together a highlight reel of Adams just like crushing dudes off the line of scrimmage and man coverage. And I feel like
you don't got to worry about that. Trey Waynes plays 7 yards off on every snap.
Yeah, mate. Well, I guess that's a good thing for you guys. So who's the third corner? Remind me again, who's the third corner in Minnesota?
No idea. It depends on the snap. It could be Mackenzie Alexander, who's been playing really well. Terrence Newman, who after a rough start has been playing pretty well. Or, I don't know, a couple snaps of Tremaine Brock. He's been playing really poorly, so I don't expect to see a lot of him. But
is Terrence Newman the oldest? No, wait, James Harrison, right? Is the oldest defensive player in the NFL? Like, how is...
in the league?
I guess not. He kind of got demoted when they took T.J. Watt, but like...
I think Newman is still the oldest. He's like...
How is he still good? He was good as of, like, what, a year ago, wasn't he?
Last year, he led the league in yards allowed per snap and coverage. He was pretty good.
How is that even possible at that position?
Yeah, no idea. Because I was thinking about it. It's like, oh, well, he ran a 4.37, 15 years ago. Maybe he didn't slow down. No, that's stupid, Arif. Don't think about that.
yeah. Like, it's just like, science would say that that's not, like, possible anymore. But I don't know. Like, random drug tests coming sometime soon, if it hasn't already, I'm sure.
Newman is a lot more exploitable than even last year. There are a lot of cracks in the armor, but whatever it is, he's certainly like a genetic curiosity.
Yeah, I will say this, and I I'm not just trying to like endear myself to Vikings fans. Like I am legitimately disappointed Trey Waynes isn't good because he's a local kid in Wisconsin. Like
that's true.
Most Packers fans were watching him play high school ball, and like when he became a first round prospect, I think like excitement levels were out of this world. And yeah, it's similar to the way like Melvin Gordon like came on his second year, and Packers fans were just like so amped up. Obviously, he's not out of the division; it's easier to root for him. But
aren't Gordon and Wentz from the same city? Kenosha?
Yeah, I believe they're both from Kenosha. They might have played at the same high school, I believe. It predates my brief time in Wisconsin.
Sure.
But I could say that with like some degree of certainty that I think they might have played together.
Yeah,
I can find out.
Let's just say they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Wayne, this is just another question. Wayne's is notoriously media shy, so that probably has more to do with it than anything. But he refuses to say whether or not he was a Packer fan growing up. Pretty good chance he was, right?
I would think. I just feel like if you're growing up now, Kenosha is southern Wisconsin, so I guess you could argue if there was a team other than the Packers, it would probably be the Bears.
Mm-hmm.
But because there are quite a few Bears fans in southern Wisconsin, right there on the border. But I would think, and yes, the Kenosha Bradford, they both played there, so they were buddies in high school. But yeah, I would think he won't admit it now, but I would guess he had to be a Packers fan.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so well, speaking of your secondary, so flipping sides of the ball.
Do we have to?
It's the most interesting part of the discussion, I think.
No, it is, yeah.
PFF has each member of the secondary is having a grade below 50. For those who want a color version of that, that is a deep, dark, bloody red for every one of those players. I find that unusual for HaHa Clinton Dix. I'm sure that'll bounce back, but what do you think? What's the problem? Are they playing well? Are they not playing well? Is PFF blind? What's going on?
Yeah, so I think the issue a little bit with the secondary is just that the personnel is not good. Really,
people are not talented.
It's as simple as that. I mean, there are very, very few guys. Now, health is a bit of an issue. They have dealt with injuries at the cornerback position. I want to say, Devon House missed time. Demarius Randall's had lingering injuries. But overall, if you invest your first and second pick in a draft in Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins, which they have done, and each of them, I think, were pretty good as rookies and have only continued to look worse and worse. And you could chalk up their second years to injuries, but this year it's like, from everything we heard, they entered the year healthy, and they've just continued to get worse. It's really, really hard to stomach, really. I mean, they had to bring Devon House back, a guy that they were more than willing to let walk to go to Jacksonville, because there was just no other option for them. And Josh Hawkins is now playing significant snaps, and if you're like, who the hell is that? You have every right to think that.
Question. All right.
Yeah, is he's basically taking over because they can't put. I mean, Quentin Rollins, I think, is a liability when he's on the field right now. I hate to sound that harsh, but if you go and you watch the Dallas game, and Cole Beasley's kind of a Packer killer, but the Packers were in cover 0 on the 5-yard line on that second Cole Beasley touchdown.
Oh,
and
God.
Quentin Rollins is his first step is just opening his inside foot and almost just escorting Cole Beasley to an easy touchdown.
Safety that's not there because it's cover 0.
Exactly. Yeah. And these things continue to happen. And, I think, one thing we talk about as Packers fans, and we talked at length with Justice Mosqueda about this, who's a great follow no matter what fandom you are. But yeah, he's incredible. But the Packers don't when you try to, I guess, label their defense and their defensive philosophy, especially at the back end, their identity is that they don't have an identity. And Dom Capers runs a notoriously difficult scheme that's a combination. They're almost never running a true coverage. It's almost unrecognizable. You can't really watch and be like, oh, they were in man. Oh, they were in cover 3. It's almost always a combination. And I think what hurts them a lot is that they rely on so many young guys to learn a very, very complex defensive scheme, and it's baptism by fire right away. And then we're 3 seasons in, and our first and second round pick both clearly do not have a grasp of that defense. So
which one is the baseball player? Which one's the basketball player?
So Quentin Rollins is the basketball player. So
Okay.
we drafted. He was our second pick in that draft.
And he played cornerback in college, and he was initially drafted to play safety.
No, so that's Demarius Randall. So
Okay.
Demarius Randall
Other way
played
around then.
safety. Yeah, Demarius Randall, our first round picks, was a safety at Arizona State. Then he played a little bit of corner, but a lot of people thought he projected as a safety because he wasn't quick enough. And then Quentin Rollins was a point guard for 3 years, and then his final year played corner. So yeah.
So because I really liked that draft from a joke making perspective.
Yeah.
Because that's also the draft that got Ty Montgomery and the guy that ESPN called a long snapper. What's his name? Christian, right?
Well, sorry, we're talking. Well, Montgomery, yeah, that was a fun draft if you think about it. I remember I was doing a show during the draft live, and they didn't draft a single player who was like meant to play his position.
Yeah,
Who's the guy
exactly, right? Because they had Montgomery, receiver, who should have played running back, and eventually he did.
Yeah.
And then a safety to play cornerback who had played basketball, and then a cornerback to play safety who had played baseball.
Yeah.
And then a long snapper to play defensive end.
Who is it that I can't think of that you're talking about that was labeled
I'm so confident that this happened
as a long snapper.
5th round.
No, I totally believe you. So that was the Jake Ryan drafts, right? They drafted. Oh, Christian Ringo is probably who you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Dude, I just did the worst typecasting ever. You said long snapper, and I was thinking of white guys. Like, I couldn't. Yes, Christian Ringo, who I think is like still lingering somewhere in the NFL. Louisiana Lafayette. I had no idea. That's a bad job of me. That was a joke with him being a long snapper.
Well, so I think one of the two, it was either the NFL Network or ESPN when they were live covering the draft. They didn't have just didn't have a scouting report on him, but someone had tagged long snapper on him, and he was actually a defensive end. So one of the two got it right. They were like, "Oh, they drafted a defensive end. That's great." And the other one was like, "Oh my God, the Packers pulled a Patriots. They drafted a long snapper in the 5th round." It was great.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Pulling a Patriots. I love how that's just like they'll always get the benefit of the doubt when they do something crazy like that.
Right. You drafted a long snapper in the 5th round. Genius.
Yeah. It's like if the Patriots had taken Roberto Aguayo and he failed, like what then?
Right, exactly.
Was it just like that's all on him, right? That's not on them.
Right, no, yeah, it's on him.
Yeah. So anyway, long story short, man, like I don't feel good about our secondary at all. Is Diggs gonna play?
Sounds like he may not. Which unfortunate. So it's probably going to go all in Thielen. Some people might see this as a potential for a Laquan Treadwell breakout game. I am not one of them. I will be excited to see if Michael Floyd is going to show the promise he did in training camp. He was a stud in training camp. He looked like a first round pick, right? So we'll see what he does in probably what's going to be his first extended action. But this is a pretty good secondary to introduce yourself, I think. To NFL play. The biggest worry I have is, of course, Case Keenum. What do you think about Case Keenum?
Yeah, I think like if I'm trying to make myself feel better, the only thing I would say is that a Stephon Diggs-less offense led by Case Keenum is nowhere near as scary, regardless of how bad your secondary might be. And I do want to qualify something too, just that I said when I talked about their secondary being trash. I know you mentioned Clinton Dix and his PFF numbers. He has actually noticeably regressed from a coverage perspective. Like I think that's another thing that a lot of Packers fans have been discussing. He's kind of gone back to a lot of bad habits that he had in his rookie season, which is like almost being like overly aggressive and taking some really poor angles. Like if you go back and watch the Dallas game,
that's straight from his scouting report.
Yeah, like that's. I mean, it's almost like he cured that completely from year 2, and then became just like a really sound safety who was also really good in run support, and now he's like kind of just back to all the negatives like that you would list on his scouting report is, I think, what you've been seeing. But what I wanted to qualify was Morgan Burnett, I think, is a really, really important piece to this defense. I just like the way the Packers have been, kind of using both he and Josh Jones interchangeably as linebackers, and really like extra run defenders. For a good percentage of their snaps, I don't lump them into the, oh man, they're terrible. I just don't expect to see them on an island in coverage a whole lot. Morgan Burnett will do some of that, but he's nowhere near the liability that I was referring to, from their corners and Clayton Dix.
So I know we're running a little bit longer than you expected. I have just so many questions.
No, it's all good. I'm good, man.
All right, okay, cool. So I've got this question about Josh Jones then. So he had this one game, I think 2 weeks ago. It was a fantastic breakout game. You heard his name all the time. Half those snaps were on special teams, so, that doesn't necessarily project well. But I expected to see more of him. Why not?
Sure. So he has been playing, like at the beginning of the season, before he had that breakout game, he was almost exclusively playing on special teams. What forced him to have like that coming on moment was injury. Kentrell Bryce, who was another guy that who basically, when Burnett plays in the box as a money backer, as they call it, which is like
how many defensive backs do you have?
If so many. Like we play dime on the goal line. Like that's a thing that the Packers do. And I don't know if it's out of just like we feel like if we're putting our best 11 on the field, like half of them are defensive backs, or if it's that they're so thin on the interior defensive line that they have no other choice. Justice jokes about this, but like there were reps inside the 5-yard line where Morgan Burnett was lined up over the guard. like, what? You know what I mean? Like that's just not. There's something about that doesn't add up. That's like if you like accidentally pick the wrong play in Madden or something.
Right. That's exactly what that is.
But yeah, so like Kentrell Bryce got hurt, and then he was forced into action. Josh Jones was, and now that Bryce is getting healthier, and they've also gone back to getting more corners on the field. They're weird, man. It's so hard to explain.
Kentrell Bryce has the lowest of all the PFF grades of all of the Packers defensive backs.
Yeah, and he's another undrafted guy, comes out of nowhere. And Packers fans immediately fall in love. Right. Look at what Ted Thompson found. And then
just look at it.
Yeah, exactly. But next thing you know, it's like the more he plays, the greater chance he has to be exposed. I expect Josh Jones to be. A lot of people thought he would be the long-term replacement for Morgan Burnett.
Right.
I guess Burnett's contract is up. I feel like he's too valuable a piece of this defense. Jones to me feels like more of a true money backer, if you want to say that, than Burnett does, and they've been lining him up in some passing scenarios. As a true inside linebacker, in their nickel package, which is basically their base. So I don't know why I haven't seen as much of him, especially that game where he broke out. He had 2 sacks. One of them he was completely unblocked off the edge. The other one he actually beat. I think it was Croft. It was like a backup tight end for the Bengals or whatever. But it was like a true pass rushing move, and people got really excited. That's where I think it needs to be used. I think if you're going to run an exotic blitzing scheme and send guys all the time.
Have him watch some Harrison Smith and just be like, do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's his strength. I think he needs to be at or around the line of scrimmage to kind of truly put on display some of those things that we fell in love with right away. And I'd probably have to go back and watch again to see if he's just not getting those opportunities. But he certainly hasn't jumped off the page the way he did in that game. So yeah,
so we've been talking a lot about the enormous weaknesses of the Packers defense, which is great. I love it. But I do want to say, when you take a look at, I don't want to make this like the PFF podcast, but I just find it so interesting. You take a look at sort of the PFF depth chart, and it's all red or green. There's no yellow. There's no average. Blake Martinez is green. Nick Perry's green, Mike Daniels is green, Clay Matthews is green. What? So let's talk about those players. First, Blake Martinez was a huge liability, I thought, for a while. Has improved pretty substantially, yeah?
He certainly has, yeah. I was rewatching the Cowboys game yesterday, and I it was almost unrecognizable to see the type of player that Blake Martinez was. And I'm not saying that as like an indictment on how bad he was, or just like trying to sound like I'm overhyping him now. But I think his biggest struggle was, last year, like if you go back and watch him against the run, because the Packers don't really, they prefer not to have many linebackers on the field in passing scenarios anyway. And don't forget, last year was when Clay Matthews was still kind of toying with being a off-ball linebacker. Right. So we didn't see Martinez much in coverage, but against the run, it was like he couldn't solve like what reading like his keys, like reading the guard were like. Like I think we used the term like getting caught up in the wash a lot.
Right.
He was almost, he was almost never like playing downhill, and now it's like that's like if you go back and watch all of these runs that they blow up against Dallas, Blake Martinez is the reason why on like I want to say like 70 or 80% of those plays, and that's high praise considering like that's also a defense where Mike Daniels is a wrecking ball in the middle. Kenny Clark, I would venture to guess. I haven't looked at the updated PFF rankings, but he's probably one of those green marks.
He's the lone yellow mark, actually, but pretty high yellow,
really?
77. Yeah, he's just on the verge of getting that green.
Yeah, he's been really good. But yeah, Martinez is like, he's just playing faster, and he's just like downhill all the time against the run. He's still, I think, like somewhat of a liability in coverage, which is interesting considering I think he was typecasted as a coverage linebacker when he came out.
Right, because he's a little smaller, right?
Yeah, he's a little bit smaller.
Yeah. Coverage linebacker, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Like that's his strength, but he stood out mostly against the run. And I want to say, if you don't mind, like if we just while we're talking about the green guys,
yeah.
You and I and Ben and Zach the other night joked about Clay Matthews a lot, and he is fun to joke about, even as a Packers fan. Like I've been very, just I guess like critical of him and been kind of a skeptic. He's been really good against the run, which has been so shocking. Yeah, like if you watch the Dallas game, there's probably like 2 or 3 times in short yardage situations where Dallas will, where Clay Matthews is just like literally like putting like a teaching tape of setting the edge. There was a 3rd and 1 where they ran like a stretch like zoned run, and Clay Matthews took on 3 blocks in a row, and it was a negative yardage play. They like tried to get to the edge on the outside. Matthews immediately just like sheds the tight end, takes on the gun. It's insane. I don't know where this is. Like, I tweeted about it. Everyone's like, "Oh, that's what happens when he's healthy." But like, has he been unhealthy since his rookie season? I mean, I guess sort of.
Yeah, maybe that's what it's like when he's finally off those dangerous PEDs.
Well, the biggest knock on him is that he hasn't been disciplined, and I feel like he's been much better at that. They also used him as an off-ball linebacker and ran a little bit of 4-3 against the Cowboys. I gotta say, I'm pretty bummed that we won't get to see them go against Dalvin Cook and like a more, I don't know, formidable rushing attack, at least with him in the mix, because most of the green has been, these guys we're talking about who have been excelling against the run, and I love like to see them get tested.
Well, yeah, so that's like the next sort of interesting set of questions. Okay, so the Packers use a bunch of defensive backs. Sometimes they're in dime and super run-heavy situations, but with the addition of Blake Martinez and that defensive line, they've got players who are pretty good against the run, and so I think it's kind of an open question then. How do you think the running game will fare? I mean, like, obviously, without Dalvin Cook, things are a lot more difficult for the Vikings. But, Jerick McKinnon looked pretty good last week, and he's had some flashes, right, throughout his career, especially sort of in his rookie year. Latavius Murray I thought he was fine. A lot of people thought he had a poor game last week. But, it's Latavius Murray, right? I don't think he's going to change much from here. They both do not generate many yards after contact, but they both can find space. And I think they both demonstrated that last week. Given sort of that understanding of who those running backs are, given the understanding of that Vikings offensive line, which is sometimes porous, sometimes pretty impressive, fairly inconsistent, but can do things in the run. What do you think about the Vikings being able to generate yardage in the running game?
I still think that there's a chance that they can have some success against the Packers in the running game. So I know I keep bringing it up, but it's just kind of like a crutch because of how I think interesting the analysis he does and how Packers heavy it is. I was poking around last night on some of the metrics that Justice puts together on setting the edge.
Oh, and he likes the TFL percentage, right?
Yeah. So basically, there's first off, I think the Vikings are number one defensively if you take away tackles for loss at like rushing yard value. At like they're like plus 127. Which basically, if you eliminate, if I'm doing this properly, and you would probably know as well, like if you eliminate tackles for loss, the Vikings have allowed the worst yards per, like the best defensively yards per carry against the run. The Packers are actually really low in those rankings, which I was shocked to see. But then I thought about it, and I'm like, well, like Mike Daniels blows up a lot of plays in the backfield. They do get a lot of TFLs. But aside, like this metric, obviously, just taking that out of the equation, teams have actually been able to establish a little bit of a consistent running game against them, aside from those like big splash plays that you see from Daniels, or the occasional Blake Martinez TFL, or Clay Matthews just kind of like deciding to be good. So I don't think it's like a stretch to say that Minnesota can still run the ball against them.
Well, it sounds like, based off of this setup, that the run defense for the Packers has been based off of some pretty splashy, somewhat volatile TFLs. The Vikings run game, especially with McKinnon, is built off of, it seems like, volatile big plays. This seems like we're setting up for a game where you're going to have a negative 3-yard run, a negative 3-yard run, a positive 28-yard run or something.
Yeah. I feel like there's definitely the chance that is the case, right? Like it's just kind of like a high variance rushing game, both on the defensive, like on the defensive front of the Packers and the Vikings. So yeah, I guess again, I'm not like overly concerned. I would have loved to see Dalvin Cook. I think Jerick McKinnon could give them some issues though. I do. I think there were even some times in the passing game against Dallas's offense probably could have exploited using Ezekiel Elliott as a pass-catching weapon a little bit more. So yeah, but you're a big McKinnon guy, right?
I might be the biggest McKinnon guy in Vikings Twitter. I'm a huge
biggest McKinnon guy.
Yeah.
So you're just like could not wait to get AP out of there, because that's something that I feel like
absolutely.
In previous years, I think last year when it was Vikings week, we were talking about just like why is Adrian Peterson taking reps from guys who are better suited for their offense?
Good question, buddy.
Yeah, tip of the cap to you guys for finally like getting,
It took an $18 million untenable contract to do it, but they did it.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of excited to see McKinnon used in a variety of ways, obviously running the ball, but maybe he'll line up in the slot and take advantage of what's happening in space. You mentioned that was something Cole Beasley did against the Packers. It'll be an interesting matchup if they do go and dime a lot, lining up a safety potentially against McKinnon instead of a linebacker. I kind of want to know how that goes. But I mean, he's a pretty quick dude. I don't expect. He's got more to learn as a route runner, and he's still got some iffy hands as a pass catcher. So it's not like he's going to be this like David Johnson style receiving running back or anything. But physically, the matchup certainly favors McKinnon, regardless if it's a linebacker or safety.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And speed and quickness. I mean, you could say it's almost you could say it kills anyone, but it really, really kills the Packers. I mean, there's precious little evidence of them being able to contain guys whose skill set I think is I guess skewing more towards that than a traditional running back of a sense. So yeah. I wanted to, so I think one of your guys wrote about this. I was reading on the Norseman. I think it was Eric Thompson. One thing that, like, when I was looking at this game a couple of days ago, even, like, if you go by a lot of metrics, like DVOA, and then a lot of this stuff, again, on Setting Edge, and, like, all these sites that do this, the Packers and Vikings are, like, there's almost, like, very little difference between them. Like, and I was kind of shocked to find that out, because I don't know if maybe I'm mistaken, but like from an outsider's perspective, it feels like the view of the Vikings, who have been like battling just the weird, like dealing with the weirdest quarterback situation and have been dealing with some injuries, are 3-2, and it doesn't feel like, I don't feel the optimism that I feel like was there last year, when it's like they have an opportunity to win a home game and just be like right back in a favorable spot and in first place in their division, where there's almost like this overwhelming confidence from the Packers' perspective. But if you look at a lot of those numbers, they're very like middle of the pack. And I think like the confidence comes from, well, we beat Dallas, we beat Seattle, our only loss is Atlanta, but like there's a chance like 3 weeks from now, Dallas and Seattle, those wins won't look that good. Like they already kind of don't look that good. They felt really good.
I was thinking about this too. So I looked at this earlier too. Packers Vikings are number 4 and 5 in offensive DVOA, number 16 and 20 in defensive DVOA. And while that makes sense for the Packers, it makes no sense for the Vikings.
Right, like where is that offense coming from? Was it all week 1 against the Bears?
It's the Buccaneers helped. They kind of moved things along.
that one.
It's really weird, and I think the difference in confidence levels comes from the fact that there's reasons to believe it is sustainable for the Packers. No reason to believe that it is sustainable for the Vikings. I mean, Case Keenum has been performing statistically in a lot of different ways as a top 10 quarterback. He's number 5 in adjusted net yards per attempt, number 6 in QBR, 9 in PFF. A top 10 quarterback statistically. That is not going to continue.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess the numbers against the Bears weren't that great offensively, but week 1 they definitely were. So I guess it is week 1 and the Buccaneers
and
game.
The Buccaneers. Yeah, so the Saints. So the NFC South really helping things. In the Vikings DVOA rankings, which I'm sure will be adjusted as more of the. Because one of the things about DVOA is that they don't incorporate full opponent adjustments until a little bit later into the season, and that might change things pretty significantly. Who knows? So before we get a score prediction from you, which we normally don't keep track of, I did remember that last week I was actually right in a score prediction, so I did mention that, but we're never right, so don't worry about it. Before we get to the score prediction, I do want to ask, offensively, who are you the most worried about? Is it Adam Thielen? Is it Jerick McKinnon? Is it Kyle Rudolph? Is it Laquan Treadwell?
The easy answer would have been Stephon Diggs. I feel like to go next man up with Thielen sounds like it's too easy, but like here's the thing. I think we might have referenced this too the other day when we were talking. Like far too many times, I feel like I've gone into a Packers game where it's so obvious the number 1 passing option in offense that they have to stop. And it's like, well, like you can game plan for that. Like you can take Adam Thielen away and take your chances. And that person is never taken away. Like, I mean, hence, like, look what the Falcons, like Julio Jones obviously is a completely different like being than Adam Thielen, but
you don't say.
Yeah, like I still feel like even if it's Thielen and there's no Diggs, like I guess you put Devon House on him and take your chances, but like that doesn't make me feel really good.
Right.
So I would still say Thielen with like a close second being Kyle Rudolph. But I want to look. I don't know how where the Packers rank against tight ends this year, but I do feel like I would feel somewhat confident saying like it's better than it used to be.
That's fair.
So for that reason, I think I still go Thielen.
And then defensively, who are you most concerned about? Harrison Smith, Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, Linval Joseph, Xavier Rhodes. A larger wealth of options, I think, to be worried about. But who are you most worried about?
Yeah, I would still say Griffin because I think that like it's still an uncertainty, even though he practiced that Bakhtiari will play, and like it with the Packers like moving Lane Taylor to left tackle, as opposed to keeping him at guard and then going with like McCray or a backup guard at tackle. Like Lane Taylor is a very good guard. He is not. I don't think his strength is matching up against Griffin at all. Like I feel like that's a huge liability. Oddly enough, it's like I don't know if there's some value in having a guard-heavy offensive line in the running game because the Packers' running game has come alive, or if maybe you could attribute that exclusively to Aaron Jones. But it's definitely Griffin. If Taylor's at tackle, they're going to have to help him, whether it be with Martellus Bennett or Lance Kendricks or Richard Rodgers or whoever. Give him some help, and then obviously that, I guess takes away from your passing game, which has been a little more wide open this season than it has been, I think, in some previous ones where they were kind of just like always in 21 personnel. Now I think they're doing more of that, but not having your tackles obviously limits you a little bit when you're facing an elite pass rusher. So I think he would be the guy, Griffin.
All right. Well, so we've got that. We've talked mostly about why the Packers are bad and not why they're good, except we had a pretty good Aaron Rodgers discussion.
Well, we praised Aaron Rodgers, and we said that Aaron Jones is he's good.
I was just trying to influence your score prediction.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha.
What do you think the final score is going to end up being?
So I picked the Packers to cover, so 3.5 was the spread. Right. So I think that's actually changed. It's gone down to 3, whatever. I guess there's
really.
I think so.
What moved in the Vikings' favor?
I'm not entirely sure. That is weird, right? Because more Packers have returned to practice, and fewer Vikings have been suiting up. So yeah, it's I don't know how that equates to the line moving in the Vikings' favor, but I don't expect it to be like a track meet. I think I guess if I had to, I would say something in the range of 24. But football scores are always weird, so I'm going to go 23 to 14 for the Vikings. I think the Packers cover. I think they win by maybe a score or two, but by no means do I feel like it's just their offense just kind of blowing the Vikings out of the water. I think defensively they're too good to lose like that.
Well, I am also of the opinion that the Packers cover. I say this in part to reverse jinx things, but I also thought the line would have been 5.5 points. That to me just seemed like the intuitive line. And of course they're the same team in DVOA, so maybe not. But to me it's like a 20. Well, I don't want to repeat your score, but 24-19, 24-20, 25. Wait, well, let's do. I think we were on the verge of a score-agami with 25-18 3 weeks ago, a score that had never occurred in the NFL. I think it did occur for the first time ever, if I remember correctly. And why not have it occur again? 25-18.
I like that. There you go.
Yeah, and we'll see.
Winning by 7 the unconventional way.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Who knows? The Packers can't be trusted to make extra points, so odd scores are in play.
Unlike the Vikings, sorry.
Whoops.
It is a perfect opportunity for odd scores. Plus, I guess the Vikings gave up a safety last week, so anything's on the table.
Yeah, that's true. Man.
So, Alex, thanks for coming on. This was great. I think we learned a lot about the Packers. I don't know if that's a good thing for our listener base, but certainly it's a productive thing. Why don't you tell people sort of where they can find you, how to follow you on Twitter, stuff like that? Sure.
Yeah. So, if you can stomach a lot of Packer stuff, you can follow me on Twitter at Alex Petakas. It's Petakas. I hate spelling it, but you kind of have to.
We're in the same boat, buddy. Yeah,
I know, right? It's and everyone's like, why don't you just change it? Why don't you just make it something easy? But I don't want to do that. So yeah, you can follow me there, and then our podcast, fellow SB Nation blog, Acme Packing Company, the Packer site. I do that, a weekly podcast, which you can find on the site. There's a podcast tab, and if you want to listen to more Packers Vikings talk in reverse. You, Arif, were on with us, so kind of just like this flipped in reverse. You can catch that latest pod and search it on iTunes, the APC podcast. You'd be able to find it there.
All right, now it's time to go into the mailbag with Arif. So first question is from Hunter on Twitter, who asks, Do the Vikings go for more of an up-tempo offense like we saw in the Bears game, or do we see more shots taken downfield like in the early weeks?
That's a pretty good question. I think in this game, they're going to try and drain the clock and have as few opportunities for Aaron Rodgers to get on the field as possible. I actually tend to disagree with that strategy because I think what matters is possessions and the number of possessions that you have. And while it makes sense to limit the total number of possessions and increase the volatility and therefore increase the likelihood that an underdog like the Vikings can win, I think that minimizing the number of possessions purely for volatility's sake is a pretty poor idea because I think the Packers defense is pretty susceptible to up-tempo style offenses because of how poorly coordinated that secondary is. And that's not a shot necessarily at Dom Capers. It's more just a question mark about how that entire secondary just seems to be kind of unable to get their stuff together. As you have probably already heard about in the interview with Alex that we just had. So I would prefer a more up-tempo offense because I think it better exploits, a lot of the things of the Packers. But I can understand, that they would try to limit the number of possessions and the time of possession that the Packers have because of Aaron Rodgers.
All right. Also from Hunter on Twitter, he asks, do we see a different kick returner this week?
I don't think so. I think if the Vikings were going to change kick returner, it would have been in the middle of the last game, even though neither Coley nor Adams were active. And I mean, the Vikings haven't released one of those two receivers yet, which is very odd. But if one of them is active, then maybe they'll see a different kick returner. There's a transcript from the pre-for presser today, where they were talking about, how often teams are pitting people kind of behind the 25. You take a look at the Vikings' average field position. It's actually only a little bit below average compared to the rest of the league. We're complaining a lot about Jerick McKinnon's decisions, and I guess rightfully so. I mean, he's not making a ton of good decisions, but our baseline is so off. It's so different compared to other teams' baselines that we're kind of getting distorted about what he's been able to do in the kick return game and how much he really is, costing or helping the Vikings. It turns out, he's turning in a below average performance at kick returner. That's not a surprise, but I think people are overstating, how much it is. Now, if he makes another huge mistake, like he takes out the ball deep in the end zone and only takes it to the 9, or he fumbles it again, then yeah, maybe. But I think for now, McKinnon's job is probably tenuously safe.
Yeah, and considering what he is replacing, it's kind of hard to be asking him to, because we're used to that after the last couple of years of Patterson bringing it out to the 30. It's just hard to ask him to be filling those shoes like that. So it's difficult. Moving on to Matt McKeon, who asks, which is the bigger challenge in containing Rodgers? Finding ways to generate pressure or maintaining coverage that lasts long enough?
I think it's the second thing, because the second thing is kind of related to the fact that once pressure gets there, it doesn't turn into a sack. And that's really difficult. And when you pair that with the fact that those receivers are so in tune with what Aaron Rodgers wants to do on the scramble drill, it is just really difficult to maintain coverage. Even good cornerbacks will lose coverage if it's a 5-second play. So I think it's that second thing that's really difficult. I think getting pressure on Aaron Rodgers is not that tough given sort of how the offensive line in Green Bay is deteriorated. It's just making that pressure meaningful by turning into hits and sacks. And
statistically, the Vikings get to him more than any other team.
Yeah, no, they're very good at sacking him. That hasn't turned into a winning record, but they're very good at getting to him. And I think
we're big on moral victories here.
Yeah, right. But the biggest issue has been, even when the Vikings are playing well at cornerback, maintaining their ability to stay with receivers on a scramble drill, because it's already difficult to cover a receiver. He knows where he's going to go. The cornerback has no idea where he's going to go. And on a scramble drill, just that. It's like an exponential increase for every additional second you add in terms of difficulty. So yeah, I think it's maintaining coverage for that period of time.
Yeah, you're just trying for so long, and pieces just wiggle free. Even the receivers at that point, it turns into a bit of a game of 500. Like, they're just scrambling and trying to make something work. Next question is from, this is good, Kyle Slabby, who asks, if we were guaranteed a 1-1 record versus Green Bay this year, would you prefer a win at home or at Green Bay?
I want the later one, and so at Green Bay is good. I also hate more than I love, which means I want to take the victory in their home from them more than I want the one in our home.
Listen, anybody who listened to the opening of this show, which described your observations on Carson Wentz, already knows that you hate far more than you love.
Everyone knows that the human capacity to hate is far greater than their capacity to love, and I'm just embracing it.
You learn to stop worrying and just accept it and move on. There is just something special about winter football and Lambeau when we win. Not when we lose, but when we win, it just makes you feel better. So I would also go with Lambeau. Also from Kyle Slabby asks, does Aaron Jones give you worries, or was his good game more of a game plan versus Dallas issue than actual talent of the Green Bay running game?
We covered this a little bit in our interview. One of the takeaways is Dallas is just significantly less talented both up front and at that second level at the linebacker core than Minnesota is, even though Eric Hendricks has been, going through a couple of struggles that I don't imagine will continue, especially because he's also had some pretty excellent games too this year. A Dallas defense that does not have Sean Lee is not one where I would set a benchmark for determining how good a running game is. Aaron Jones is a pretty good running back. There's a reason the Vikings were considering him in the draft. He doesn't at the moment, and sure, this will probably come back to bite me or something, but at the moment, he doesn't concern me more than any other average or above average feature back. He could even be an above average feature back, and that's something that you prepare for in your game plan and you think about, and you want to know, how you can stop the run in those situations. But I don't think he's gonna pull out 200 yards or anything like that.
Not this game anyway. Complete side note, is Dallas good this year?
No, and I thought they would be.
Yeah.
I don't think they're good.
It's odd, and especially because it looks like now their running back really will be serving a suspension. It's hard to... I've watched more games of theirs than I care to admit, and it's just hard to tell if they're good this year.
Yeah, it is. It really feels like, all three components of what made that offense good last year have taken a step back. That offensive line's taken a step back. Dak Prescott's taken a step back. And part of that is, Prescott has never been comfortable forcing the ball down the field. And he feels like he has to press a little bit more often now because Ezekiel Elliott has also taken a step back. So they've got kind of more third and long situations. All three of those are having problems. That defense, I think, is actually better than last year, but not appreciably enough for it to make a difference or to cover what seems to be the loss in quality on the offensive side. That's what it feels like to me anyway.
Yeah, the defense last year wasn't great, but the offense wasn't making a bunch of mistakes. This year, the defense has gotten better, but the offense has managed to make more mistakes. So it turns out it's not really balancing out the way that they would like.
Right, the offensive regression or step back or whatever you want to call it, far greater than the defensive improvement.
Exactly. Next question is from Jason Tivide, who asks, was thinking about ordering Indian food this weekend for the Vikings-Packers game. Should I go with butter chicken or goat biryani or both? Also, should I drown myself in butter chicken sauce if we lose in horrendous fashion to the Packers?
I'm always a huge fan of goat biryani. Butter chicken's fine. It's good. Goat is such a good underappreciated meat. It gelatinizes really well. And I think, Indian cuisine does a pretty good job with goat.
Really does.
So I would go with the goat biryani.
There's plenty of great goat dishes in the majority of Indian restaurants. Since we're talking Indian restaurants, also I just don't like butter chicken that much. If I'm going to go chicken and it's going to be Indian, it's likely going to be tikka masala, and I'm going to tell the chef to hurt me. So, but man, butter chicken's I just don't enjoy it, I guess. But Indian places in the Twin Cities, do you have a go-to?
I don't like Indian food that much, so I haven't explored the Indian food scene in Minnesota. And, I think a lot of people listening to this podcast would be surprised by that. But, think about it this way. I had this weird relationship with my family. They tried feeding me Indian food every single day. I kind of associated that with, one or the other. And, I ate it every day for 17 years. I'm not a huge fan of it. And so I will sometimes be in the mood for Indian food. And so I'll just order nearby. Nearby, there's Gorkha Palace. Their Indian food seems to be good enough, which I know that's not a resounding endorsement or anything like that. But there are some really good Indian food places in the Twin Cities, and I am not familiar enough with them to honestly recommend them.
When I lived in Roseville, I used to go to India Palace all the time, which was out by it was just out by Roseville, out by just right off of 35W when it's doing that weird split through split north of St. Paul. And I really liked that. That was actually the first place I ever had Indian food, and I really enjoyed that. Boy, there was a place in Bloomington when I lived there, and you wouldn't think Bloomington and Indian food, but in this case you do, and it's really good. I think it was Tandoor.
I think I know what you're talking about, actually. It's I think it's by Bush Lake Road and. Oh man, I think I know exactly what you're talking about, and
it's off of American. It's off of American Boulevard, and
was it in a weird place where you expected a warehouse to be?
It was right next to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I didn't expect.
When you go inside,
that place is really good, actually.
Yeah.
I agree.
When you go inside, there is a when you go inside, there's a signed picture of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for some reason.
Yeah. Same place. Yeah, that place is really good. Run actually by a Bengali family. My parents are very proud of that fact, even though they never go. It's actually pretty good. It's just, it's always weird to be the best Indian food in the Twin Cities. Yeah, it's in this third ring suburb.
It's in Bloomington off of American Boulevard. It's 2 blocks away from the Sonic. So, but trust me, it's totally worth it to go past the Sonic, and it's right next to 35W. You're not going to miss. Yeah, it's but surprisingly good. So now that we've appropriately plugged, let's move on to the next question, which is from Kevin Sayer, who claims to know you, or claims to have been to a football game with you.
We went to the Gophers game together.
Yep. He asks, does Arif still own a hat that is suitable for a child, meaning his son owns the same hat?
So I was at the Gopher game. I forgot to bring a hat. It was quite cold, so I went shopping for a hat. And I'm at the stadium. It's all of it's going to be overpriced, right? But the kid size hat, I don't have an enormous, physically I don't have an enormous hat. Obviously, I've got.
You shopping in the kids section again, son?
Well, it was a third, it was 33% cheaper. It's the same size as the small adult hats that I would need to get. This large children's hat looks the same. And it's way cheaper. Of course I'm going to buy it. So I bought it. And Kevin, of course, he notices immediately that it's a children's hat. So it's clearly, I guess, I should have said it's the same hat. But, he notices, is that a children's hat? And I'm like, yes. And it's very comfortable. Thank you. I probably have it. I can't find it.
That's just too bad that you don't know if you actually have it or if it has been donated to a secondhand kids store or not. Second question is, I thought Case Keenum came across well in the All or Nothing Rams series on Amazon. Your impressions as to whether the team suddenly seemed as if they put a little more effort or importance in when he was on the field versus Chicago compared to Bradford?
I always dislike putting in takes about a player's leadership or whether or not teams or of people are more likely to give more effort when a particular player is on the field unless it becomes like fairly obvious. I think that, and it has to be really obvious. For example, I think was it the 2013 NFC Championship game when it was Jay Cutler and Aaron Rodgers, and Vikings fans were hoping for both of them to lose, and Jay Cutler, I think,
an asteroid to hit the stadium, I believe, was the hope and prayer.
Right, and I think Jay Cutler, he tore his MCL or something like that, but people didn't know what his injury was.
But he was
so the
just
Bears
pouting.
went to the second quarterback, and then they had to go to the third quarterback. It was just awful. And a bunch of people were calling him not tough, and I hated that. And it turns out he was actually extraordinarily tough. He tried getting back into the game several times, and the team wouldn't let him. And it turned out he had a grade 2 tear on his MCL, which is just immensely painful.
Yeah, they wouldn't even let RG3 onto the field if he did that.
Right, exactly. Like even the quarterback killer, Mike Shanahan, wouldn't have let his quarterback on the field in that situation.
Sit down, sir. No, you're not.
But and so I generally don't like doing it. But there's situations where I thought Josh Freeman had clearly checked out. Christian Ponder in his final year with the Vikings clearly didn't care and had checked out. And if in that Green Bay game where he played, I think it clearly had an impact on the rest of the team. I don't think that there is anything obvious enough for me to say that the team is much more willing to play for Bradford or play for Keenum, or that one of them demonstrates more tangible leadership quality than the other. Which is not to say that that's not the case. One of them can inspire more confidence and effort than the other, and that may have a team level effect. I just wouldn't know who it is.
Next question is also from Kevin, who asks, will Rhodes stick to the receiver, considering that Nelson is not as sharp anymore? I'm concerned that he'll find a lot of space versus Waynes. I don't know if you'll find a lot of people saying that Jordy Nelson isn't sharp.
No, I see where Kevin is coming from. I don't think he's the same receiver he was before his ACL tear. And I think he had regressed really substantially when he first came back from injury. I thought he looked really slow, and he'd lost a lot of burst speed and agility. He has since regained a lot of it. The first meeting with the Vikings, he was just out of sorts. You could say, hey, Rhodes covered him really well, which, yeah, sure. But I think Nelson was just not who he was. And then in the second half of the season, he really turned it on. He was legitimately just quicker on the field. And so, he's still a pretty good receiver. But he's no longer, a receiver that you can say, hey, he deserves to be in an argument for the top 5. Now he's a receiver. And this is literally, we just had this conversation. So you all probably are just listening to me repeat myself because this is the conversation that Alex and I had in the interview. Now, he's in conversation for top 15, top 20. And Alex was making the argument, hey, maybe Rhodes should shadow Devontae Adams instead. I still, disagree, but, Alex knows the Packers way better than I do. And maybe that's the case. I think he should probably shadow Nelson. But yeah, I'm just worried for whoever's going to be lined up on Waynes because, whoever it is going to have a lot of space.
Yeah. Kyle Segal asks, Kyle Sloter, is he already better than Gino Torretta?
This is such a deep poll.
Way to reference the 1991 Miami Hurricanes quarterback, the national championship team from 1991. Congratulations, you're pulling that one out.
I've yet to watch Kyle Sluter play in a Vikings uniform, but credit to Gino Torretta. 5 years in the league as a 7th round pick. That is impressive.
It is.
Is Sluter going to have 5 years? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. But we haven't seen a lot of plays. The problem is that Dusty's not on to defend him and tell
defend
us,
his honor. Yeah,
defend his honor is right. Nobody loves, even Sloter's mom doesn't love Sloter the way that Dusty loves Sloter. But yeah, probably not. We'll see. But 5 years is pretty good. Fun fact, he was on the championship team, or he was on the 1991 Miami Hurricanes college football championship team, along with The Rock.
Yeah, Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
So how about that? Don from Ohio. Let's start with the football one. He asks, will the Vikings start 4 quarterbacks this year? So that would imply that Keenum gets hurt.
Right.
Bridgewater plays.
Right.
And Sloter plays.
Yeah, it would probably be Sluter, right?
Yeah.
That is well within the realm of possibility, but I'm going to say no. I do think it's 3.
Think it stays to 3 this year?
Yeah. It stays at the Vikings general average, which actually is 3. Like, I think since 2010, the Vikings have had more years with 3 quarterbacks starting a game than 2 or 1.
Which really does feel just a little below average.
Yeah, right.
To do a callback. Next question. Best flavored jelly to go on peanut butter in a sandwich?
It's boring answer, strawberry. I don't think it's grape. I think that the grape flavor is just a little bit cloying. I think the raspberry is nice, but I think the tartness is just, it's good in other applications more than it is with peanut butter. So I'm going to go strawberry.
And I just don't like, sometimes when I ask for mailbag questions and I see the ones that come up for shows I'm not going to be on or not originally going to be on, I think to myself, oh, that's good that Dusty's getting that one because he'll have 20 minutes on that. And then I see questions like this and I go, I don't like peanut butter jelly sandwiches.
Oh my! You're such a monster.
It's
God.
Never been a thing. It was
Will
never
you
a
have
thing.
a good food take on the show?
I've had good food. We just discussed Indian food, and we agreed that the best place. Don't come at that. Don't come at me like that.
I should have reworded it. Will we go an episode where you don't have a bad food take?
No, absolutely not. God, it was just never a thing when I grew up. It was just never a thing we had in the house. We had peanut butter, we had jelly, we just never ate it. And
what did you use the peanut butter and jelly for?
We used them separately.
What did you use the jelly for? Like waffles or something?
No, sometimes you wanted jelly on toast. And you just had jelly on toast. It was just never combined in my household. It just was never a thing. So it was something that I never grew up with, and I've watched my son have them. I haven't stopped him from doing it. He doesn't ask for them often. Or
I like that image. Like, hey, what are you doing in that peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
What did you want? No, you can have a cucumber instead. Which is too bad because my son really likes mini cucumbers, but that's not the point. The point of the story is that I don't prevent him from having them. They were just never a big thing in my house when I was growing up. I never really knew of their existence until I was in like 5th or 6th grade when I was doing sleepovers and people would tell me that they, or their parents would, hey, would you like a peanut butter jelly sandwich? I go, why would you combine those two things? No. Do you have some? I'll just toast it and put the peanut butter on there and let it melt. Then it'll be fine. Just keep that jelly from me. Ugh.
Oh my God!
Yeah, it was just never a thing when I grew up. It's. I don't know what you can blame it on.
How are you allowed to raise children?
Hey, I'm not preventing them from doing anything. Okay, well, I'm preventing them from having more
the
fun.
critical experience that anybody who should be allowed to be around children needs to have, which is the joy of a peanut butter jelly sandwich, or the terror if you are allergic to peanuts.
Yeah, let's go with that. If the last week has taught me anything, it's that there really is no test for having kids or raising children. And I'm going to leave it at that. Those who know my week will understand that. Let's go with the final question, which is favorite Vikings-Packers moment.
Oh, that one's tough. Favre beating them, pretty good.
Favre beating them, really good.
Adrian.
Favre coming out to the booze.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
Just raining buckets down on them.
I think Adrian, sealing the game 17 or the week 17 playoff game. You win and you're in. That was. I mean, he's got 200 yards, almost got past 2,000 in that game, almost got the record. That was just fantastic. I was at that game, so I'm really biased for that one. But yeah, oh man, that one was great. I think those two are are kind of up there for me. And I know there's probably a bunch of good ones from like before the Favre era, but those two definitely stick out to me.
Yeah, in the pre-Favre era, of course, you have the games featuring Randy Moss going crazy, and not just the mooning game, which gets the most press.
So good.
But there were a couple of games where he was just having his coming out party, his rookie season, and he was just so fantastic against him. But if I'm going, mine is different because my son was born like a day before the game, and I was sitting and like rocking him to sleep while we watched it, and trying to be quiet while Adrian Peterson tried to break the rushing record. Which, if you've never held a newborn and like tried to rock him to sleep while watching a football game, a lot more difficult than you would think. Especially when you want to yell or throw your hat across the room or be noisy in any way, shape, or form. You can't do it because there is a goal that you're trying to achieve.
That sounds awful.
Don't have kids, Arif. Your Sundays are going to suck for a few years.
On it.
Done and done. And that is going to be it for this week's shows. Arif, do you have anything to plug for us?
So aside from my podcast appearances on Acme Hacking Company's podcast, really great group of guys. You already heard Alex. All of them are as insightful and knowledgeable and pleasant to talk to. So that was a really good podcast. I was also on the Purple Podcast, or not Purple Podcast. I forget what it's called. Maybe it is the Purple Podcast. 1500 ESPN with Matthew Collar. That's also going to be in the show notes. We talked about, what it's going to take for Case Keenum to sustain this level of play. That's fun. I've also got a piece coming out on actually that very question: how good is Case Keenum? So those are the three things I am plugging for now.
Sounds good. Again, if you like the show, if you enjoy it and would like to help in any way, shape, or form, you can donate in a couple different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate there, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and give a sustaining donation there. So that's going to be it for this week's shows. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back early next week talking about the win or loss against the Packers. So we will see you then. So on behalf of Dusty, who is probably still on the phone with Comcast, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening, and demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. And we'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pagachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.